So if you miss any or all of it, you will be able to watch the webinar again on demand. Following today's discussion, we are going to be sending out an email that contains a link to access the webinar on demand. And we are taking questions from the audience. So if at any time during today's presentation you have a question for our panelists, please don't wait, don't hesitate, just use your GoToWebinar control panel and submit your questions. And we'll try to get to as many as we can near the end of today's webinar. Okay, with that, we're gonna kick off today's panel discussion, which is Scaling DevOps, a panel discussion. We have 4 really great panelists today. If I can get to my slide deck here. There we go. Our panelists today, we have Jeffrey Martin, who is the Director of Product at WhiteSource, Matt Brown, who is Principal Solutions Architect at Veracode, Tim Buntel, who is VP of Application Security Products at ThreatStack, and Andre, and I'm gonna mess up your last name, maybe I shouldn't even try it. You can tell us how it's pronounced, but VP of, thank you. See, I never would have gotten that. You're VP of Engineering at Zero North. So welcome, gentlemen. Thank you all very much for taking the time and being a part of today's panel discussion. I would like to actually start by having each of you kind of tell us a little bit about yourself. And why don't we go ahead and start with you, Jeff?
Sure thing. So I'm Jeff Martin, Director of Product at WhiteSource. We specialize in open source security management. But personally, I've been in software industry now for 20 years, 15 of those or so in medical devices and software quality, and then more recently, security.
Excellent. All right, great. Matt, tell us a little bit about yourself.
Yeah, I'm Matt Brown. I'm a Principal Solutions Architect here at Veracode. We focus primarily on application security here. I've been in software for probably about 12 or 13 years, and the last 7 or 8 years has been more on the security side.
All right, excellent. Tim, what about you?
Yeah, thanks. Tim Buntel. I look after the application security business here at ThreatStack. We offer a full stack security observability solution. My background is kind of 100% in developer tools and technologies. I've been building tools that professional developers and IT organizations use for my whole career. So a couple of companies now in the security space. So I would say I'm right at that line of being as much a security guy as a developer and tools person. So great to be a part of the conversation.
All right, great. Thank you very much. Finally, Andre, tell us a little bit about yourself.
Hi, I'm Andre Bestadano. I'm the VP of Engineering at Zero North. At Zero North, we focus on building a platform that enables customers to embed security in the software development lifecycle. We partner with many of the security tools out there, like WhiteSource and Veracode. And personally, I've been in the software business for over 20 years. About 17 of those I spent in financial services, and the last 3.5 at Zero North, focusing on security.
Excellent. All right. Thank you, gentlemen. So today's discussion is going to be based partly on our latest ebook over at Security Boulevard, which is going to be available for download on securityboulevard.com. But anybody who registered for today's webinar is going to receive a link by email that they can use to download the ebook at their leisure. So don't forget to check your email for that link when it comes through. But as I said before, it's going to be based loosely on the ebook. There are certain things that are in the ebook that obviously we're not going to have time to discuss today, but we do want to kind of talk about the general idea of scaling DevSecOps and how it, why is it difficult? Is it difficult? What it entails? Why it's important? All the things that the developers are dealing with today, and especially as security takes us a much larger role in the development process. So our panels today, obviously judging from their experience and their job titles, are knee deep in DevSecOps, either from the security perspective or the developer perspective. And hopefully, we'll get some useful information from everybody to everybody over the next 45 minutes or so. So let's start out with kind of the basics of scaling DevSecOps. I think it's important that we kind of set the groundwork so that folks on today's webinar have an understanding of what we mean when we're talking about scaling DevSecOps. So, so let's go ahead and start with the obvious question, which is, what does it mean to scale DevSecOps? Let's start with Jeffrey. Why don't you, if you can kind of give us just a kind of an introduction to scaling DevOps, what it means to scale DevSecOps.
Sure. So, boy, actually, scaling DevSecOps, I guess, is actually not that hard. Scaling it well is very hard.
Right.
It's very easy to scale poorly. The idea here being that security being built in to the same process you're already considering when you're building ops into the development cycle. So I'm kind of the process guy of the group, I think. And fundamentally, the idea here is that embedded into your actual development team, the Scrum, you have both the operations, which everybody's been doing for a while now, but now increasingly we want to include the security professionals. Sometimes it's a champion, sometimes it's actually a separate team that's speaking on there. Some teams separate it out and they rotate through security roles, but the idea is that security has the voice that ops has already. The problem with scaling that is there's a lot more developers, there's a little fewer ops guys, and there's much, much less security guys. Just fundamentally, security is still a specialty in a lot of places. So the biggest problem about scaling DevSecOps is getting that knowledge embedded into the team.
Okay. All right. And yeah, obviously, that we keep hearing about skills gaps and the number of qualified personnel who can kind of work alongside IT organizations and IT teams to ensure that security is a major part of the software development process. It's not an exclusive issue to one or two companies. I'm hearing organizations everywhere are dealing with this. So, with that in mind, then, Matt, maybe we can kind of talk a little bit about how scale kind of impacts security in DevOps and really what companies need to be aware of there.
Yeah, I think this is kind of a new thing, at least from my perspective, for security professionals over the last 4 or 5 years, where I think you're typically used to being able to implement tools. Say I buy an identity and access management tool or some sort of tool that I implement, and I really don't have to get as much buy-in as people that are driving the process. I think developers nowadays are highly empowered to rapidly release products, what Jeffrey was talking about through this DevOps process, and security professionals now have to find a way to keep up. And I think that skills gap also comes from the fact that as security professionals, we have to start learning a new language. We have to learn the DevOps language, which means understanding like a developer. It means understanding like an ops person, not just thinking I can throw in a security product there without being able to actively communicate, understand their processes, and really collaborate and build a good relationship going forward. It's just so easy as a security professional to get stuck in the mindset that needs to be security first. I need to block things. You really need to collaborate and build out something.
Okay. Andre, any thoughts there also on how scaling kind of impacts security?
Yeah, for sure. So I mean, as Matt and Jeff said, security traditionally has not been part of the DevOps process, and it needs to be part of it because otherwise, not only is it not able to keep up, but you can't scale. And scaling in a DevSecOps program is an order of magnitude harder than scaling DevOps because you have this other component now that traditionally hasn't been part of that group. It is, adopting DevSecOps is a cultural transformation for every company, and scaling it, in my opinion, is hard. To Jeff's point, everybody can scale it, but not scale it well. And scale it well is incredibly hard because it takes alignment from a cultural perspective, from a political perspective within the company. It takes an alignment of skill set and really embedding security processes into that CI/CD pipeline, into the traditional DevSecOps processes. And it takes really having that shared accountability across all the teams to make sure that not only do we not do we build products of higher quality, but we also build secure products? So from that perspective, all those things have to be aligned in order for a DevSecOps strategy to be successful and to scale well.
Yeah, I agree 100%. And you actually kind of it was a great segue to my next question, which was, really how is scaling DevSecOps different from just scaling regular DevOps? And to your point, it's much more difficult because there are more moving parts and more things to be aware of. But Tim, are there other kind of considerations there that that kind of make or not kind of, but do make scaling DevSecOps more difficult than just scaling regular DevOps?
Yeah, I mean, I think in the case of scaling regular DevOps, you're working with a set of tools and practices that largely exist already. And it's a matter of realigning through this cultural transformation to figure out how are you going to pull those together in a new way, break down barriers, make folks work more smoothly and efficiently together. In the case of DevSecOps, you're starting with something that might be a security practice that had, wasn't connected with the sort of agile software development process. You've got kind of old compliance, governance-driven processes that are highly manual, that are people-focused, and you're trying to bake that into a new way of building software with a whole new philosophy about the importance of security. So you have new tools to introduce, new products, new services, new requirements. So it gets more complex. It's not just finding a new way to do what you were doing before, but essentially finding a whole new way to think about security. And that touches on tools and people and processes.
Okay. All right, great.
I'll just add one more point, if I
Sure.
may, that the other difficulty in scaling a DevSecOps program is the fact that as you scale, you have to consider the variety of security tools that are available within an enterprise, a variety of static analysis, composition analysis, dynamic analysis, container security, cloud security, and achieving that at scale is very difficult, not just across the spectrum of different types of tools, but also within each category, there are multiple contenders that may exist in different groups within different business units or development teams within the enterprise. So that makes scaling much more difficult in general than your traditional DevOps process, where the tools are a little bit more streamlined, if you want,
Right.
and that can add additional complexity to it as well.
Yeah, that's a really good point, and it's something that I was going to bring up a little bit later on in the discussion, but it's certainly something we could ponder now, which is, how much is too much when we're talking about security and in the DevOps process, and because of the wide range of security tools that are out there, how does an organization go about deciding which facet of security are they going to be putting into their pipeline to kind of bring in DevSecOps as if we're looking at for code security, are we looking at application security, testing, or there's just so many avenues that organizations can go down when it comes to security. So how does an organization go about making those decisions?
And maybe as long as we're on the basics slide, it's important to have a very clear goal, not just on why you have DevSecOps, but also why you're scaling it. Without a goal, you can't really formulate the problem set you need to solve. Most people are not implementing DevSecOps because they want a slightly longer line on their resume. They usually have a driving need. Most of the time, that is security slowing me down. It used to be operations. They were slowing me down. I embedded them in the team. Can I do the same thing with security? Embedded in, solve my speed problems. So they're not slowing me down like my legal team is. Maybe in 5 years we have dev legal SecOps. But
oh God, no.
fundamentally, I know. But fundamentally, you need to have a goal. You need to have a reason for doing this. And tool selection and the process falls out of that goal. And then there was silence, just crickets. Sorry.
Yeah, I mean, I see the same thing. We see the same thing with our customers, right? And this is why, starting with that notion that this is really a philosophical transformation that has to start, right? And it's getting the entire organization to realize that security is important no matter what industry you're in, whether you're regulated or not. Security is part of building good software and delivering value to customers. So starting with that point of having everyone get on board with the value and recognizing that security just has to be something that everybody has a stake in is a key, starting point, I think, in setting that, what you were just describing, Jeffrey, right?
Yeah, and I would probably...
I certainly think so, but yeah.
I would probably add too that when a lot of the customers I work with, you're talking about not a one-size-fits-all thing. So I can't take DevSecOps and put it in the same format for every team, because in fact, you're probably going to have teams that are using different tools. So the ops side is not even uniform. So that while ops tools are generally streamlined, you're going to have to deal with 10 different ops systems. And so you have to really get in the mindset that you're going to help on a really deep level on team by team, process by process to make sure that security gets integrated properly in each one of those spaces.
All right. Can you guys hear me okay?
Yeah.
Okay, all right. My headphones just like totally died. I don't know what happened. So it was a moment of panic on my part, let me tell you. Okay, so let's go ahead and move on then and talk about our next topic, which is some of the considerations that organizations need to keep in mind. And obviously, we've already kind of started that conversation. We've gotten some really good information so far, but let's take a step back and just kind of think about, some of the things that organizations need to consider when they're undergoing or looking to undergo scaling their DevSecOps in their organization. So, excuse me, beyond the ones that we've already talked about, are there other kind of unique considerations that go into scaling DevSecOps that maybe organizations, it might not be readily apparent to a lot of organizations before they get started? Whoever wants to take lead on this one is fine.
I think we're all too polite.
Yeah.
Everybody's like waiting for everybody else to go.
My microphone died again.
That's why I chimed in. I'm like, oh no, she's gonna think she's dead again. I'll take it, I guess. So
Okay.
I guess I'm the least polite. The look, the biggest issue here is that you're trying to retrofit something. Very few people have no security processes or tooling or some idea of what they're doing in security. Because as Matt pointed out a couple of times, everybody cares about security now. And as we get into realms of bigger and bigger data that we have to secure for more reasons, you've got privacy, you have business reasons, etc. This introduces some considerations we're not used to in the DevOps world. Legal, business ramifications, maybe we were a little used to that because in ops, you never want anything to be down, you're losing money. But with security, you're talking about actual real world implications that can have real world impact on the actual business, but it's all preventative. None of it's reactive for the most part, unless something really goes wrong. So changing the mindset there to really be a risk mitigation mindset from a speed and production, almost like a production line mindset, is one of the biggest considerations here, because you have to re-educate a little bit to really get this process smoothed. And that's what I was going with goals earlier, right? Your goal is to minimize the risk in your DevOps pipeline to the security team without costing you extra time. For most part, that's the goal I see most of our customers want to pursue. I don't know if anybody disagrees with me. That'd be a lot more interesting than agreeing with me.
So, actually, I'll jump in for a second if you don't mind. So what we see across our customer base is that some of the drivers for DevSecOps are really stemming from the legal side of things, from the regulatory side of things, or just from the risk management side of things. And that was somewhat surprising to us at the beginning because we thought these were more driven by either the security teams, by their customers, but more and more we see that some regulations like PCI regulations or State of New York or a number of others are really driving DevSecOps initiatives because it's the only way to keep up with those regulations. It's the only way to meet the demands of the audit teams or the risk compliance teams. And to me, that was sort of an interesting perspective that we hadn't necessarily anticipated going back, 2-3 years probably.
So then let's kind of look at the roles then, since, obviously introducing security into DevOps is, difficult enough. And then scaling it up can only be compounded if you don't have the right folks involved. So where does the security professional fit into all of this? And Matt, maybe you can start us off with this one, because it seems like at least with DevOps, the developers are being tasked with more. And I wonder if this is something that developers should be doing, and if it's something that perhaps, especially with scaling, if the security professional really needs to be more embedded, if you will, in the entire process.
Yeah, I think from the security practitioner standpoint, I think you kind of take the role a little bit of kind of the coach or the GM, where you're trying to put together the team of who's going to support this DevSecOps initiative. When you look at some of the participants that are going to be required, you look at, for instance, a security practitioner interfacing with a developer. A traditional kind of attitude from the security practitioner is developers don't care about security, they don't know about security, but instead really I have never met a developer who wanted to write a flaw in the application that resulted in a huge exploitation of a database. Mm-hmm. Developers want to do the right thing, and if security practitioners can take that role where we want to ingrain security just into the mindset of the developer, so not only that we have great tooling to help everyone and help manage the situation and report on it, we also have that mindset within the developer, within the ops people, that they want to really just build secure systems, secure code from the ground up.
Okay. So Tim, what do you see then from the developer perspective? I mean, to Matt's point, are the developers kind of more than willing to take on the security operations, if you will, or embedding security into DevOps to kind of, to make sure that, their code is secure and the applications that they're developing are, good for the market? Or is it, are you seeing any pushback from developers, or what are you seeing out there?
Yeah, I mean, I think I agree with Matt that, no developer wants to be the one that, committed the change that led to the breach, right? But I think we have to be realistic that developers are goaled to deliver value through features, right? And this is a focus that a lot of engineering organizations, the pressure is on those tangible business features most of the time. And it can be difficult to step up as a developer and advocate for security as an important part of the solution when they're somewhat intangible. I think another part is that thinking that you can draw on your experience from a DevOps transformation can sometimes deceive you, right? In many cases, in a DevOps transformation, we were looking at activities that we were already doing and finding ways to automate and bring reuse into those processes. In security, we may not have ever been doing those practices at all. So you don't have that starting point that you can quickly automate. You're having to learn how to build these processes from scratch. So thinking, I was good at making DevOps happen, therefore I should be able to be good at making security happen just by following that same pattern, can lead you down a false path, I think.
Okay.
So just building on top of what Tim said, both sides have to learn to do something new and learn from each other at the end of the day. And to your question, Charlene, of what's the role of the security engineer in a DevSecOps, new world, it really has to be a shift from being a gate to being an enabler. And coming into a team and collaborating with a team and bringing the appropriate knowledge, security knowledge, best practices and tools, and enabling developers to really continue to move at the speed of DevOps with security built into the process. And sometimes that's challenging because it's a paradigm shift for security professionals who traditionally might have been seen or acted as a gate, but now they have to become enablers and adopt a lot of those DevOps principles. And at the same time, DevOps engineers have to learn security, which to the points made earlier, they don't ever want to write bad code, but they don't know how to write secure code necessarily. So it's a learning process. It's about understanding what all the potential vulnerabilities they may be introducing are and how to, write, better code at the end of the day. And they can only learn that by collaborating closely with the security professionals. And that collaboration is really key. It's a key consideration to a successful DevSecOps strategy.
So does that, go ahead.
Sorry, I was going to say there's one major role we sort of haven't mentioned at all, and I'm just personally offended as a product person. Product has a role here. They do. Fundamentally, a lot of the DevOps orgs, Agile, story points, they're product driven still. Product professionals also need to be educated about the importance of security. Because just as you were saying, developers are gold on feature delivery. The only people who are more measured on feature delivery is your product owner.
Mm-hmm.
And that mindset has to change there as well. We always leave product and kind of QA out of DevOps, right? But they actually become even more important here, especially product, lesser on QA. But just sort of a reminder that product role does exist and they need to be bought in and get some of that mindset as well. They don't need the same level of training a developer does, but they do need to understand some of the basics and they need to understand the impact on their process.
So
you're absolutely right. And depending what the drivers are, either the product owner is the driver for security, or they have to quickly get on board and understand the external drivers and get up to speed quickly, to your point. So they definitely have to be core part of that team and that effort and that strategy.
Yeah, and some of our customers, I've seen a lot of people have a divorce between their product management and the actual product owner as well. It happens a lot. Product manager sitting there on the business side saying, I need to mitigate this risk, and the product owner is like, yes, but I have tickets I have to close, issues that I have to deliver. So it's just an interesting wrinkle that I think wasn't as big of an issue with DevOps as it is with DevSecOps.
It's a really interesting point. Yeah, interesting. So so what needs to happen then to kind of make that less of an issue? And is it the fact that security is now involved that makes that more difficult, or is it the scaling aspect that makes it more difficult?
I think of it as cost. I think it. Oh, sorry. Go ahead. Whoever was going.
I was going to say I think it's really both. I think it's both about the adoption of the DevSecOps and taking those first baby steps in the right direction. But then it's about, okay, how do we take this, 1, 2, 3 example and bring it to scale throughout our entire portfolio of applications, throughout the entire enterprise. And those are sort of different challenges, but they're both very important and they both need to be addressed across the board.
Okay. All right.
And like so many of these answers, I suppose, in terms of the hows, education is important. The product people, if they're not on board, need to be educated, 1, what the goal is, but 2, some of the just basic costs that a good security program does introduce, because you don't get anything for free. You're not going to introduce security in DevOps and actually have it be as fluid as it was before. There's going to be bumps. There's going to be transition period. Maybe you'll get to the same point, but at the end of the day, it'll cost you some time. Just not as much as separating security from DevOps.
Okay.
You're moving that time into this process, but saving time overall. So education is really important. And I think we even got a question that said, how much should we educate our developers? I'm going to give the horrible, pithy answer of as much as you need to, because every organization is completely different. And it's almost impossible, I think, for anybody to answer it. Although anybody who wants to is welcome to try, I suppose.
Yeah, well, you're stealing my thunder, Jeff. So I was actually just going to say we have gotten a couple questions in so far, and I think that the education one is definitely one worth taking a look at. Well, they're both worth taking a look at, but since we're on the topic of education, the question is, what level of security training should we give the developers, and how expert, quote unquote, do we make them? So, yeah, Jeff, I'm pithy notwithstanding, are there any guardrails that we can kind of set up regarding, education and security training for developers? I mean, is there a certain threshold that they need to know, or they need to reach, and certain fundamentals that they need to know to be able to kind of do this effectively? Anyone besides Jeff?
So I'll jump in and I'll say that I think it's very important to provide a very basic level of training and education so that developers understand the core principles. That being said, once vulnerabilities are discovered as part of your regular development process, first of all, finding them early is very important, and addressing them early is important. And once you detect certain patterns of vulnerabilities that are being brought in by certain individuals or teams or in certain applications, it's important to really focus on those and make sure that those don't get introduced again and they don't happen again. So I guess the short answer is in my opinion is that you should take a pragmatic approach where you lay a very basic foundation and then you address certain issues as needed to make sure that they don't become bigger issues. And if you address them early, then that's a good recipe for success.
Okay. Are there any, like, I don't know, certifications or anything like that are worth taking a look at, or is it more of a kind of a homegrown security training, like these are the things you need to keep a lookout for, things like that?
I think from my perspective, some of my customers, the most successful thing they've done is kind of, Andre, what you were mentioning, very pragmatic approach where they look over time and see what are the major issues that they're experiencing. So maybe a specific type of application vulnerability at the code level, or maybe it's some sort of component that they're consistently adding and not understanding. So by looking over time and seeing what's there, you're able to do some training. So for instance, you could set up maybe half an hour, hour-long webinar with your vendor where that person is going to go through a specific type of security flaw and help educate the developers to know how to fix it, why it's an issue, so that they better understand things that you can see are in practice that are affecting your DevSecOps.
All right.
I'd also encourage folks to consider that developers have to think about more than just the application too. A big part of DevOps has been allowing developers to have a lot more autonomy over bringing their code all the way to production, right? So think containers, serverless, highly automated pieces that the developers are more than ever responsible for end to end. So helping the developer understand more than just, SQL injection and cross-site scripting issues at the application tier, but really understanding how do IAM policies that I set up between my different services can impact security. It's a broader landscape. So do encourage folks to think beyond just the code that the developer is writing too.
Yeah, and actually that reminded me, I'll loop back for a second. That's one of the things you need to educate product on as well. I think in general, everybody knows about web application security, for instance, right? You mentioned cross-site scripting. That's sort of what a lot of uneducated product people would think of as the be-all end-all of security, versus how services interact, how they trust each other, and how they communicate, and the vulnerabilities on those layers, which they're more complex. They're a little harder to understand for the layperson, which a lot of product people still are. It requires some education to really say, okay, no, we're not just at the application layer anymore. So I thought that was a great point, Tim.
And attackers don't think that way, right? So, we talk about DevOps breaking down silos. And attackers have been doing that all along, right? An attacker doesn't say, I only think about the application tier and I don't have any context about where that application's running or what the host infrastructure or what the cloud, public cloud service implications are. They think, how do I exploit this entire complex stack that we've created in modern cloud infrastructure?
Attackers have an easy job here because they only have to be right once. Application owners have to be right all the time. So that's a much harder position to be in every day.
Good point. Very good point. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and move ahead here. We've already talked a lot about the challenges, so we'll just skip over that. Let's talk about some best practices, folks, because I think that is really what a lot of our attendees are looking for. So, what are some of the best practices that you guys can offer up as far as scaling DevSecOps is concerned? Anything that you have, but I'd like to kind of start with this question of, when does a team or an organization know the time is right to scale DevSecOps? Tim, you want to take that one?
Yeah, sure. I mean, obviously, the ones that we see most are driven by external influences. So a compliance need, a funding event, things that are getting the organization to really have to holistically address how they do everything in their organization. Luckily, in the case of compliance, we have some structure there, right? So although we sometimes complain about going through a PCI audit or HIPAA requirements, it is kind of nice in that some thoughtful people in the industry have spent some time thinking about what are high impact activities that you can perform. So we even find that we encourage some customers who may not have PCI requirements themselves to look at some of the guidance that are coming from those regulatory structures as a good starting point. Certainly thinking about something like a containerized environment and how you have to think about working with data in those sorts of application architectures is worth thinking about whether you have PCI requirements or not. So that's an interesting starting point, I think.
I'm a bit bullish on this than Tim. I would answer that the time is now. And if companies have not implemented or piloted DevSecOps, then they should. And if they have, then they should scale it out. I don't think that waiting for any reason is necessarily a good strategy. There may be different drivers that can accelerate that process for sure, but I think that most organizations ought to start thinking about it now and not wait until something bad happens. So that's my take.
I'll throw my 2 cents in here. To me, there's 2 good practices for scaling, and I'm just going to call them horizontal and vertical. One is if you have a whole suite of products or your product can be broken down into smaller pieces, you implement your DevSecOps on one piece and then scale it out to the other pieces, kind of a vertical scaling. The other way is to do it a little bit differently. Don't try to do all of your security practices at once. Implement 1 or 2 and then keep adding more practices. In general, a lot of these organizations have existing processes at least. So moving over one security process, let's say checking for legal compliance, is a good starting point, then add on vulnerabilities, or vice versa, whatever makes sense for your organization. But to me, those are the 2 good practices, at least the way I've seen anything scale, which is implement a single type of security practice, or implement the whole thing on a small piece of your product or a product in your portfolio and then expand it outwards. They both have different pluses and minuses, but generally those are 2 good scaling approaches.
All right, great. So that's actually another good seg into my next question, which is how can organizations, what are some of the things that they can do to advance their DevSecOps scaling without breaking other stuff in the process? So, I mean, obviously the starting small and moving out is one way to do it, but are there other things that organizations can do to kind of make sure that, you know, they're not like a bull in a china shop when it comes to scaling DevSecOps? Anyone?
So I can take that, I guess. Introducing, to the point that Jeff was making, introducing certain types of vulnerability scans first, and then expanding that over time is usually a good strategy. Also, starting early in the process, either early in the development process, or even if it's a legacy application, just starting with one component of it is usually a good idea, and that allows you to learn, to practice, and then to scale. That all needs to be done as part of a well thought out strategy, and the strategy needs to be comprehensive and take into account all the areas that risk can come from. But the implementation of that strategy should be done, you know, in a practical fashion, taking one step at a time, starting early, starting from, you know, one way to look at it is start from the left and shift to the right. Start with your code, with your open source risks, then look at risks from the environment into which you're deploying, the cloud, the containers, and so on. So usually, you know, I see that's a good strategy, starting from the left and going to the right, while in other cases, customers have done, you know, vulnerability scanning in their production environments for a long time. They're comfortable with that, and then they start to maintain that position and harden those live production deployments, and then start shifting left little by little over time, maybe one layer at a time if you want.
Yeah, I would kind of add a bit of a caveat as well, that when I talk to people, a lot of times the kind of the buzzword within security folks has been break the build. And if you want to start to scale up your program, that would be the exact opposite of what you would want to do. The moment you decide that I'm going to go ahead and break the build, then developers just tune you out, ops people tune you out, and they have a lot of power at the organization because of the products they're delivering are really the lifeblood of pretty much any organization out there. So I tell people, you know, don't try to put, you want to put gates in there, but don't let the gates be blockers right now until you have a real well thought out process where you guys have been talking about, something that you know can work, excuse me, and scale out well.
Okay.
We've had a lot of customers that we work with have had success with kind of some smart outsourcing and some managed services as well. I think that's something that folks tend to overlook. I'll have lots of organizations say, I can't hire the right people or I can't find the right skills. But there's lots of really good kind of co-managed services that are available there, where you can have folks who can maybe take the first pass, you know, look at the first, you know, kind of first line of monitoring and help escalate the most important stuff to you. That can be a nice way to jumpstart some of those initiatives too. Also gives a little bit of a relief from the pressure as your team comes up to speed in understanding how to build these efficiencies in. You can take advantage of some outside expert guidance.
Interesting. Okay.
And one note there is, I think it's important not to cave to the pressure and scale before you're ready. If your car can't get you across town, you don't go to try to take it across the country. And because security is such an important initiative for so many companies, there's a real push sometimes to just go. We'll figure out the scaling problems as we scale. Get it working. Make sure it's not, you know, annoying your developers before you sit there and try to actually scale it out. Fundamentally, don't try to scale something that's broken.
All right, great. Well, we are just about at about 15 quarter to the top of the hour. So we're going to go ahead and go into the question and answer period here. But before we do, I want to give you guys a chance to kind of, if you have any like last minute thoughts or any other best practices that you want to let the audience, you know, impart to the audience, then now would be a really good time to do that. While I remind the audience that if you have a question, you can go ahead and use your GoToWebinar control panel and submit it. And we'll start Q&A here in just a second. But guys, I'm opening the floor to you now. If you have any other last thoughts or best practices, bring them on.
Yeah, I would say this is
Such a polite crew.
You guys are
that
killing me.
that is as kind of daunting as this seems, the whole scaling DevSecOps. Take it as an opportunity for growth. From my perspective, working with security practitioners, think of it as an opportunity now to learn a really strong new skill set. We're lacking security professionals in general. We're even more lacking in security professionals who could do something with DevSecOps. So take as much opportunity as you can to learn about the industry, to learn about development, what Tim was mentioning, learn about serverless containers, the sort of system and key components that are going to be there now for years to come. If you develop those skills, you really elevate yourself to, I think, a huge new level within the security practitioner community.
I'll add that I think that there are three very important things that people should consider in order to achieve scale: automation, automation, and more automation. And ultimately, with automation, with the right processes in place, with the right tools in place, and with the right mindset, you'll be able to achieve the scale you need to achieve. And just like you've been able to adopt and scale DevOps, embedding security into it doesn't have to be such a daunting task. I'm not saying it's trivial, but it's absolutely doable. And taking it one step at a time and moving it at the pace that you're comfortable with should get you where you need to be.
And I think there's one thing we just haven't mentioned at all, which is kind of proving the value. Anytime you're taking an initiative like this, there is a level of what am I getting for the price I'm paying? And try it. And in security, this is very hard to track because ideally you want no problems, but you should have some idea of where your risk is before and what security was costing you in terms of time in your development process. And you should have a goal for where your risk is afterwards. And, again, back to time, is security costing me more or less time? Hopefully less. And those should be surfaced everywhere along the way that you can to prove to people that this is something worth doing. So if those are the two goals that most people have when they go in, they should be able to prove those goals are being met or hopefully exceeded as they're scaling. Too often I just see people with no clear idea of actual metrics they're actually trying to drive. And geez, we could talk forever about just ways to measure risk, but fundamentally pick a way. It almost doesn't matter which one, and show the results and the progress.
I think that should be a great next panel actually on measuring risk.
Right. Yeah. Absolutely.
And a great way to do that, I think that many folks overlook, is practice and try this stuff, right? So we often wait until something goes horribly wrong to see if what we've put in place is really adequate for handling security. But we can take the same experimental approaches that we use in other aspects of our work as engineers and software creators to test security as well. And that can range everywhere from automated testing, to Andre's point, all the way up to running tabletop exercises and sort of simulations that allow your entire team, again, breaking down those silos, to see in a controlled environment how you'd respond to these things. And it's a great way to highlight some of those weak spots that you might want to target first.
All right. Great. Well, we are at about 10 minutes to the top of the hour. So I do want to go ahead and give us a few minutes here for questions from the audience. Again, if you have a question, there's still time. Just use your GoToWebinar control panel and submit your question. And hopefully we should be able to get to a couple here. So we did get a question in earlier from a gentleman who is interested in scaling security in data ops, or data ops, depending on how you say it. Looking for any views from you guys, if you guys have any thoughts on scaling security in data ops. Any thoughts there?
I'll go. I'm okay. The least polite guy, so I'm just going to steal it. Go. Data ops is by itself a problem, and for most people, this means scale of data. Mm-hmm. At the end of the day, security cannot slow you down. It's important to not try to let's say, completely cover all of your data. You do want to cover all your input output, but at the end of the day, don't worry so much about the data is really what I'm trying to say. Data operations is really just a scale problem by itself. Security doesn't necessarily have to live with that data. Treat it as just a data set. At the end of the day, it's almost a distraction is really what I'm trying to say. And maybe somebody disagrees with me, but just fundamentally, I don't know if I would really be too concerned about the data portion in data ops.
All right.
I agree with you, actually. I think it's the right way to think about it, that it's just a maybe larger problem to begin with, but you're applying another layer to it, the security layer, and it's the same as any other domain at the end of the day.
All right.
That was
Great.
much better said than me. I went on for like 30 more words, so that was great.
Yeah, it's all good. It's all good. Okay, next question here. Which budget do you guys usually see DevSecOps funding coming from? Is it product dev, ops, security, or a mixture?
I can jump on this. This surprises me all the time. I think it comes from the budget of the team that has the biggest driver at the end of the day. It could be risk and audit. It could be security. It could be product. It really depends on why the company is putting in place a security strategy and a DevSecOps strategy. And usually the one with the biggest need ends up paying for it, in my opinion. That's what we generally see.
Okay. Anyone else?
I mean,
All
honestly, what I see is those budgets slowly combining. I think separate security budgets are in 15 years, we're going to laugh at the idea of a separate security only budget, except for like red teams, right? It's not like you have security developers and product development org, and they should be budgeted separately. The very fundamental idea of DevSecOps is to combine them. That's been happening with Dev and Ops slowly, where a lot of the personnel is moving over towards the development budget. And really the only thing that's staying on ops is your infrastructure bills. I think you're going to see a similar thing with security. So just in general, Tim, that's what I see.
All right. Excellent. So then moving on to the next question here. How early, and this is something I hear all the time, how early in the DevOps cycle do we bring in security folks?
Yeah, I'll take that one.
Okay.
I think I think the formulation of that question tells a lot to me, right? Which makes you think in terms of this thing that you have to insert at a certain point, and it's this big kind of monolithic practice or something. And remember, as we've been working to embrace Agile and we've been bringing DevOps into our org, the whole thing is to break things down into small iterative cycles and chunks. I think that's the way you have to start thinking it. It's not something that you bring in or don't bring in. It's something that we're weaving into our process in the same way that stories have replaced architectures as the unit that we want to focus on. That's where we want to start thinking about security at that level. So it's not we start of this big thing and then now it's time for security.
Yeah, and I think that if you don't do threat modeling up front, if you don't embed security as part of the design of an application, you miss an opportunity to do the right thing and to make it easier down the road to maintain having security as part of the overall DevSecOps process. So I really do agree with Tim that it needs to be done up front. It's imperative that you do that in order to be successful.
Yeah, and I think even with the system that question implies, where you have a separate team of security, there are still things you can do to embed more security into your DevOps that's a little short of the full transformation. In which case I would actually answer before your DevOps cycle. Use your security guys as a education resource. Just from the formation of that question, I'm going to assume they're not ready to go full DevSecOps. But early starting points could be as simple as using your security folks to educate your DevOps guys early.
All right. All right, great. Well, we're about 5 minutes to the top of the hour, so I'm going to go ahead and close out the question and answer period. I do want to thank everybody who did submit questions. There were some really good ones. So just a quick reminder that today's event has been recorded. So if you missed any or all of today's webinar, or if you just want to watch it again, you will have the opportunity to do so. We are going to be sending out an email after today's webinar that contains the link to access the webinar on demand. And the webinar is also going to be living on the the Security Boulevard website, so you can always go look for it there. Just go to securityboulevard.com/webinars, look in the on-demand section, and it should be right there waiting for you. Also, a reminder that everybody who registered for today's webinar is going to be receiving a link to access and download the ebook that was mentioned at the top of today's webinar. So please take a look in your email for that link. And also, you know, when you're on Security Boulevard looking for today's webinar, look around, at the other webinars that we have both upcoming and on demand. Hopefully there'll be one or two or more that pique your interest. Matt, Jeff, Andre, and Tim, thank you so much for your time today. Great conversation. I got so much out of it, had a great time doing it. So I hope you guys had fun too.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, guys. It was fun.
Thanks so much.
All right. Also want to thank the audience for joining me today. This is Charlene O'Hanlon, and I'm signing off. Have a great day, everybody.
Take care.
Take care.
Bye.